welcome once again to Calaveras Living. Now, in today's program, we're going to talk about the history of Copperopolis, the early history and just what's been going on in many hundreds of years. And our guest is Rich Lundin, and you've seen him before on some of our programs. I kind of kid him that he knows everything that ever happened above the ground and below the ground. Rich, it's good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Now, how come the interest in Copperopolis? I mean,
Well, One Judah Research Institute that I'm the director of has had a program, and I've been involved with exploration for certain types of deposits called volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits in Arizona and over here in California for 40 years. And California has a 250-mile long belt of these deposits that go all the way from Butte County all the way down to Merced County.
Kind of down the center?
Well, not down the center, mostly
Eastern?
over here on the west side of the Mother Lode deposits.
Oh, okay.
You see here the maps of the Mother Lode gold deposits. Well, these are just slightly to the west of that. Okay. And one of these areas is the Sulphur Springs Valley. Pardon me, not Sulphur Springs Valley, the Salt Springs Valley.
Salt Springs, is that where Copperopolis is located?
Yes, Copperopolis is a relatively new town that was founded in the 1860s. But what I'm going to talk about is the early history. This is part one of a four-part series that we're doing for the Calaveras Enterprise.
So that's going to be in print in certain
Yes,
editions?
it's going to be in print.
Okay.
And but the early history of the area is what I'm going to talk about today.
When you say early, you mean real early?
Well, really early, too.
Yeah, okay. Way back.
What happened, everybody sort of thinks of the Salt Springs Valley as a nice little valley with some lakes in it and salt springs. Well, between 250 and 150 million years ago, it was the bottom of a very deep ocean. And in that ocean, volcanoes erupted. And these volcanoes spewed out lava and other stuff, but also hot water. And they formed in the submarine environments a thing called volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits. Now, what does that mean? That means...
I was just going to ask that.
Oh, you're right. Well, the volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits are being formed today in the bottom of the deep trenches in the ocean. And what happens is that solutions bearing metals come off of these undersea volcanoes, and they are very concentrated in metals, and they deposit these metals in beds. And the beds themselves are very high in pyrite, chalcopyrite, galena, and sphalerite, which are what the old-timers used to call sulfur salts or sulfides. Well, these deposits contain copper, lead, zinc, silver, arsenic, and
no gold?
Oh, yes, there's gold in them too.
Okay.
But very small quantities. If you go to the bottom of the ocean, and they have been down and sample these deposits, the gold associated with them runs about $1.25 a ton. It's not very high.
Not worth collecting.
Not worth collecting. Well, anyway, these formations were bent up and squeezed and were on end and ran down the center of the Salt Springs Valley. You can see some of the volcanic material, just like Mount St. Helens. If you go west out of Copperopolis and go over the hill, that ridge there is a silicified rhyolite dome. And that runs, probably about 60 miles. And that was one big, huge volcanic system like Mount St. Helens, and now it's on end, just being all folded up.
How do you find all these things out?
Well, I've been working in volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits for 40 years in Arizona. and I had a very good team that I was working with over there. And then some of my mentors worked over here in California, and then I worked over here for a short time.
Okay, but they would find that from, I mean, articles or
Well,
examination.
they would find these massive sulfide or volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits in various places in the world. One of the major places that they found it was in Arizona, at a place called Jerome. And they found these things outcropping on the surface. And they were very rich in copper, lead, zinc, gold, and silver. And they were mined all the way as far back as the Native Americans.
Yeah, Jerome was a big, very successful copper mine. Huh?
Yes, it was. As a matter of fact, it still could be.
Yeah.
And
right up on the side hill, very steep.
yes, very steep. And but like areas in California, people have moved in over time, and people don't want mining there. So anyway, I digress.
Well, and I interrupted you too. I'm just not a well-trained host.
Well, in the Salt Springs Valley, most of the land out there now in the flats of the valley is very rich in agricultural, and it had water with the various lakes that were there. And the springs had fed civilizations going back as far as 8500 BC.
Wow.
And we know that because when a major gold mine was put in production there in the 1980s, they found the evidences of the people that had lived there that far back. Well, what's really interesting is that there was an earlier occupation, about 8,000 BC out there, and then they left. And the Salt Springs Valley was desolated for 500 years because of extreme drought. And so that's something we got to be worrying about with global warming.
Well, right, and of course it's very hot too. That is a hot area too.
Well, it's a hot area too, and the springs dried up, and the lakes dried up to a certain extent, and people just didn't live there for 500 years. 500 years.
Wow.
And then they came back, but the people that came back were not as skillful in adapting to the environment as the ones that were there previously. But anyway, the story of the early occupation and mining in that area, the Native Americans never mined anything there. They may have gotten a little salt from the salt springs, but that's all they needed.
So other people moved in there. People who weren't Native Americans.
That's correct. And it was never settled by the Spanish. And the first peoples that came in here were people that took advantage of a major transportation route between Stockton and the gold fields in the 1840s, 1849. Okay. And these people said, we can make more money off of selling crops and food to the miners than we can making gold.
Yeah.
Or finding
so
gold.
They were raising crops there themselves at that time in the mid-1800s.
Right. And it was pretty well settled in the 1840s, the early 1850s, by these people that were raising crops there and selling them to the miners. Also, along the major trail that went from Stockton into the Angels Camp, the Antelope Trail it's called, a lady who the district is named after, Madame Josephine Felix Heddick, set up a boarding house. And she did right well.
Well, that's kind of where Highway 4 is now, or generally?
Well, actually not.
Not.
Highway 4 is to the south of that.
Okay.
But this would be about 8 miles to the north of Highway 4 is where the Antelope Road went through.
And along there is where she opened her boarding house.
Or opened her boarding house. And the miners came, and they stayed there, and they spent money, and they ate her food, and
it wasn't more than a boarding house, was it?
Well, no, it wasn't more than a boarding house.
Okay, it was just a place to eat and sleep.
Right, place to eat and sleep. She was very strict about that.
Legitimate operator.
Right,
Okay.
and She had been imported from France and really showed some style and was a great entrepreneur. Well, anyway, the mining boom in the Mother Lode, it's not well known, but the people were working out the placer gold deposits pretty rapidly because there were a lot of people coming into them, looking for gold, and they thought they could pick it up off the street. Well, most of the placer deposits in the Mother Lode were exhausted by 1858. And so 10 years of people picking it up out of the stream beds and working hard had pretty well exhausted it. And camps like over there at Columbia and Angels Camp, various other camps throughout the area, the miners said, well, what are we going to do now? We don't have any gold. Well, when the miners and prospectors came through, they found, kind of rough-looking quartz like this, just like this. And, well, that's not so good. We'll go over to the Mother Lode. And they went over to the Mother Lode.
Can't get much out of quartz then.
Oh, we couldn't. Well, there was a little gold in the quartz, but not much.
Okay.
So they went over to the Mother Lode and worked there until finally they were out of luck. And so they started looking around. And what had happened is that in geologic time, probably about 60 million years ago, there had been some tectonic squeezing of these volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits, and solutions had come out of them and gone into cracks and fissures. And these metalliferous or metal-bearing solutions came into these cracks and fissures along with quartz, and they formed at least some quartz veins that are over in what we call the western series of the Mother Lode, and that goes through the western part of the Salt Springs Valley.
Okay.
So anyway, but it was pretty lean pickings, and the miners that were originally coming through the area, they didn't think much of it. Well, a lot of the
Here again, this is in the later 1800s, huh? After 1859 or so.
Oh, no. This was in 1850, about 1858 to 1859.
Okay,
This all
right
one
around.
year.
Okay.
So some of these miners and prospectors hired out to work for the local landholders who were still making good money, selling grain and selling fruit and vegetables to anybody that could buy them. And the prices of fruit and vegetables, fresh fruits and vegetables, and grain and forage for the horses were quite high. So anyway, they sort of settled down as hired hands, but they still had the itch for gold. And in the wintertime, when the rains came, they started prospecting the gulches, and they'd found a little color here and there. The gold would be washing out of the quartz veins themselves. And so they said, well, I think we can do something here. Well, the word got out that there was a little bit of gold in a place called the New Diggings. And that's just north of where the new development of Copperopolis is.
The new center there.
Yeah, it's about 2 miles north of that. There was a little town called Hodgson, Hodson, Hodson. And so the miners localized themselves right in that area there and started looking at the quartz veins. And where there was quartz that they could crush down easily and get the gold out of, and how they got the gold out, they crushed the quartz down to a powder, and then they ran it over amalgamation tables, a table with mercury on it. And they'd get a little bit of gold. Well, they were just about getting days' wages, because in those days, days' wages were about $2 in gold per day, and gold was about $12 an ounce. And so you had to work pretty damn hard to get the gold out. So anyway, about that time, some people that were over in Angel's Camp and over in Colombia said, those veins over there in the new diggings, they might have some promise if we go and look at them pretty carefully, with some capital and put some mills in.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was this, that they went over there and they looked at it and they said, well, let's try and put a couple mills in. So in 1859 to 1860, they put 3 mills in, little stamp mills, to crush up the ore and get the stuff out. But they didn't make a dime off of them, for the simple reason of this, John. Well, the miners would take their quartz ore off to an assay office, and they'd crush down the material and they'd get an assay, and it'd say it ran, even 1/10 of an ounce of gold per ton. And that was pretty lean, because the stuff over in the mother lode was running 1/4 to 1/2 an ounce of gold per ton. And then they went out and tried to get the gold out, and they didn't get that. And they said, why? Well, the problem was that the gold was tied up in 2 forms. One in the quartz, which was easy to get out. They get a little bit out of it that way. And the second was that it was in the form of auriferous pyrite and auriferous chalcopyrite or galena, or argentiferous galena. Argentiferous means silver-bearing galena. And you could crush that stuff all the way down to nothing. But unless you treated it chemically, you couldn't get the gold out. And so they built the mills, they tried to get the gold out, and they couldn't even make days' wages.
They probably lost money building
They
the
probably
mills.
lost money. Well, the thing about it was then that it looked like the whole area was going to go bust. Well, in 1860, the Union needed copper in a big way. And John McClarty was a fruit peddler. He was a hired hand for one of the farmers. And he'd go around and he'd try and peddle fruit to people. And John McCarty was a smart guy, though. He had been working in the gold fields and this type of thing. And he found an area near where the present site of Copperopolis, the old town, is.
The old town portion.
The old town portion.
Yeah.
And he found some green rock, just like this. I don't know if you can
Yeah,
see.
maybe up kind of close. I'll get you up on hold it.
Yeah, you can possibly see the green right here. This is some a massive sulfide ore from the Empire Mine, which is there at Copperopolis.
Yeah, a lot of green in there.
Yeah, it's green. He spotted it on the surface. And he
Some
took
red,
it,
some red too.
yeah, and he took it to a local mining engineer, and he said, yeah, that's copper, all right. And we need copper bad, because the U.S. was getting in the Civil War. And they needed copper for the shell casings and for various other needs, and for brass for the Union Army. Well, the price of copper went right through the roof. And the Union could pay for the high price of copper because in the Comstock over there in Nevada, they were mining tremendous quantities of silver. So the U.S. dollar, the federal dollar, was backed by silver, where the Confederate dollar only had backing of people saying, well, we'll be a real country someday.
Yeah.
We have all this cotton. Would you want some cotton? And the foreign countries had found substitutes for cotton. Britain had found that they could grow cotton very nicely over in Egypt. And then the U.S. government had, through a naval blockade, had blockaded most of the ports of the Confederacy by 1863. And so Confederates didn't have any copper. And they didn't have any silver to back their currency. And so anyway, there was a copper boom from 1860 to 1869. And the copper was in the form of a copper sulfate called chalcopyrite, which is about 55% copper. So it's very rich.
Yeah.
And the massive sulfide deposits, or the volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits that they found right on the ground, they started mining them like mad. Well, during this time, promoters got involved. And when promoters get involved, the fame of the Copperopolis mining district, and then it was later called the Madam Felix mining district, because she was the local person that really knew how to put things together.
There's a monument for her, is there somewhere over there?
Oh, yes. Where she used to live, there is a monument to Madam Felix that was put up by the Eclampus Vitus, I gotta get that right. And they do a good job with monumenting historic figures.
Yeah.
And they have fun doing it.
Well, that, it's interesting too, and it really helps, not just people such as yourself, but the general public to learn things about the history of the area that they wouldn't otherwise know.
That's right. And little known figures, they specialize in that, especially ladies of ill repute.
Except Madam Felix was
Madam Felix was a good straight-laced.
Good repute.
Oh, yes, she was. And she married, after her husband died in 1852, she ran the show by herself until she married a Mr. Heddick. And so the Heddicks, Felix Heddick Farm is still there. And there's some trees there. The building's gone, but there's the monument right there, and you can go out and see it. But anyway, during this time, the Confederacy said, hey, we need copper and silver in the worst way. So there was a Confederate sympathizer that had been snuck into California in the 1840s. His name was Senator Gwin. And Senator Gwin arranged for some mines of this volcanogenic massive sulfide deposit material. And that's what this stuff is right here. It doesn't look
now
right.
That's really green too. Yeah. Maybe hold that up real close to you, and they can get it up higher, and they can get it.
Yeah.
It's almost kind of like you're green on your shirt.
And this is very heavy, and it's got chalcopyrite, pyrite, galena, and sphalerite all in it. And that's the problem, is when they started mining this stuff farther up the mother lode, farther north, they ended up with, at the Penn mine, they've ended up with a situation that they couldn't get the copper out. They could get the lead and zinc and other stuff out, but they had trouble getting the copper out. Well, the people there at Copperopolis had the same trouble because it was chalcopyrite. It was a copper sulfide ore, and it normally would have to be smelted. So they tried and built a smelter there. Well, the problem with the smelter was that this is some of the smelted material.
Maybe up a little higher. There you go.
Yeah, the smelter wasn't very efficient, and they found out that they put 50 pounds of ore in and get a half a pound of copper out of it. And so instead of doing that, they decided, okay, let's ship this all the way around the Horn, which they did, to New Jersey, where they had copper smelters there that really knew how they work.
But that's expensive.
Oh yeah, but the material was running about 15% copper.
Oh, really?
And there was a premium being paid by the copper smelters for the copper. And the copper smelters also got the gold and silver and lead and whatever all at the same time. So they'd made out real well. But the thing about it was that throughout this whole region, people had tried to smelt these ores. And if you go all the way from up north in Butte County all the way south down to Merced, you can find the remnants of these smelters that were there. And you pick around at the old slag piles and you'll see metal. And it's really quite interesting. But anyway, the publicity from the discovery of copper, and I will talk about copper in another talk, the copper boom, a little bit more detail.
Because there's quite a bit of detail, and before you go today, I want you to I should tell the folks out there a little more about the written articles that'll be out there.
Yes.
Okay.
But anyway, Senator Gwynn tried to get the copper to the Confederacy, but Unionists showed up and said, we're not going to have this go to the Confederacy. We're a Union state. And so that the kibosh was put on that.
Yeah.
We even found evidence by our research in Nevada. The Confederates sent an expedition up to try and seize the Comstock in 1864 from Arizona.
Yeah.
And but anyway, I digress.
Well, no, I mean, none of it's digressing. I mean, it's all interesting and actually goes by so quickly. But before we go for this time, the articles are going to start to come out when in the Enterprise?
The Enterprise articles, the first one should be out in about 3 weeks.
Okay.
And I've got to clean up the article that I'm working on right now and get the illustrations in it that will make this more real. And people can see the Enterprise articles. They'll either be in the Calaveras Enterprise or in Lodestar.
Oh, okay. Oh, because they put some good articles in there. Now, we're going to do a couple more shows on some more of the history of the Copperopolis area?
Yeah, that's correct. And
Okay.
the copper mining portion, even though it was so short, was very important for this reason, that in the United States, we only have a few areas like this in which there is volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits that are rich in metals.
Mm-hmm.
And this was shut down in 1869, and it didn't reopen. And these, the mines that are still there and deposits are still there. And then like other deposits in Arizona and various other places in the West, these deposits here, and that's the reason why Geno Research Institute is interested in studying them,
Okay.
are continuous
Good.
and economic. And if the mining laws or the reclamation laws here in California change, they would form a very viable and environmentally clean way of getting metals out.
Well, that's good. Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to. I hate to stop you. We could go on for hours. I think I could just sit here and enjoy all of it. But you'll come back soon, and we'll continue on the series.
Yes, we
Talk
will.
more about Copperopolis and all the things that are under the earth and all the people who have come and gone.
Yes, that's correct.
Rich, it's always good to see you.
Thank you, John.
Always. And we will see you next time on Calaveras Living. And I hope you took notes so you can read this all back.